I'm a big fan of stylish action games like Devil May Cry and Bayonetta. I love these games' sheer spectacle, personality, and combat depth. In the year 2025, the Ninja Gaiden series has made a return with a remaster and a sequel being released later in the year, and has me excited to be able to Azuna drop back into another game that was a pillar of the genre. However, there's a stylish action game that also hasn't seen a new entry in years, that I also feel deserves a return, and that's Viewtiful Joe. Viewtiful Joe is a side-scrolling stylish action game developed by Capcom and released in the year 2003 on the Nintendo GameCube. It was praised for having fast-paced action with a vivid movie aesthetic and comic art style. I remember playing this game with my best friend as a kid, and being amazed at how cool Joe was in the crazy action and film mechanics. I'm a huge fan of Capcom and many of the games and IPs they've created in their long tenured history. Many of their creations have influenced my taste in video games since I was a kid. Games like Strider, Devil May Cry, Marvel vs. Capcom, Mega Man X, and Resident Evil are still some of my favorite titles of all time. Viewtiful Joe is no exception to this list of phenomenal and influential franchises. In this video, I'm red hot kicking deep into what made Viewtiful Joe such an amazing title. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into how Capcom made one of the best action games of all time. This is my Viewtiful Joe Retrospective. Viewtiful Joe was first unveiled in 2002 during the Capcom 5 reveal event in Japan. The Capcom 5 was 5 games exclusively for the GameCube made by Capcom's most notable creators such as the legendary Shinji Mikami and Hideki Kamiya, Masuda51 stepping into the Red Killer 7. And the other games were Piano 3, Dead Phoenix, and RE4. At this time, Capcom's production Studio 4 was led by Shinji Mikami and was responsible for developing games like Devil May Cry and the Resident Evil series. Even though production Studio 4's titles were doing well for Capcom, some clashes were going on between talent and upper management. This eventually led to the company making a small subsidiary, which would be Clover Studio, to allow production Studio 4 more independence when it came to making titles. This is noteworthy due to Viewtiful Joe being the only game from the Capcom 5 to attain any critical acclaim and see a sequel when Clover was made. I'm not really counting RE4 for any of you in the comments since it was the 4th entry in a highly regarded series. Viewtiful Joe was directed by Hideki Kamiya, who at that time was a rising star in the company due to directing RE2 and Devil May Cry. There are quite a few similarities between Devil May Cry and Viewtiful Joe. Both have cocky goofball protagonists that wear red with blonde female leads and incentivize stylish play while having high difficulty. Now, Devil May Cry's inspiration stemmed from being initially designed to be RE4 in the arcade action games of the 90s. Viewtiful Joe was inspired by tokusatsu style superhero shows like Ultraman, Kamen Rider, and Power Rangers. This isn't just apparent in the designs of the characters, but also in the expressive dialogue and the mannerisms of the cast, especially when we see Joe transform in the opening level. Kamiya usually designs his games around the foundation of being stylish with flair and the protagonist having a carefree attitude. This design philosophy comes from Space Adventure Cobra's protagonist, the eponymous bounty hunter Cobra, who is cocky, carefree, and dressed in red. Sounds familiar, right? With this background established, let's move on to how Viewtiful Joe plays. When it comes to the gameplay, Viewtiful Joe is a 2.5D action game that blends the stylish over-the-top action of Devil May Cry with the level design and set pieces from games like Mega Man. For instance, there is a style system that rewards eliminating enemies based on variety, speed, and avoiding damage, and having levels that contain being set on a train to explode, pits of lava, underwater physics, blowing up space stations, and using Joe's abilities to solve puzzles and continue progression. This segues into the attacks and abilities that Joe has in his arsenal. Viewtiful Joe's gameplay centers around the VFX powers granted to Joe through the V-Watch given to him by Captain Blue. These abilities are Slow, which is used to react to quick attacks and increase Joe's damage output. Mach Speed, which creates after images of Joe that can damage multiple enemies, restore background boxes containing items, and gives Joe fire properties. And Zoom, which stuns weaker enemies and allows for access to new moves like a ground slam, a roundhouse kick, and a stronger version of red hot kick, and can be used in combination with Slow or Mach Speed. Each of these is unlocked after defeating Captain Blue in the 3 boss fights you have with him in the first couple episodes in the game. As I said earlier, the VFX powers don't just play a role in combat but also in level progression. As you progress through the game, you'll encounter puzzles and obstacles that will require utilizing your abilities to overcome them. Some of these are pretty evident at the beginning of the game, but as you progress, they become more challenging. For instance, in episode 1, you'll encounter the flying platforms, and they can be raised and lowered by activating Slow and Mach Speed. Throughout the game, you'll encounter them frequently. However, in episode 5, instead of them being over water or other platforms, they'll be over pits of lava. And in this same area, they add puzzle elements like raising and lowering the lava and creating platforms using the water from pipes to increase the challenge. So even though you see a lot of similar obstacles that reappear, they keep it fresh by changing the environment and adding a new element required to overcome that progression blocker. Joe's abilities can be also upgraded and expanded via the power-up shop that you can access after every other level. In the shop, you can buy health expansions, lives, a turbocharger that helps increase the refill rate for the VFX gauge, limited weapons like boomerangs and bombs, and new abilities like the slide kick and Ukemi. An arsenal like this allows for some creativity and combo variety, especially when it comes to dealing with enemies, and the game definitely isn't lacking in its enemy variety. The Bianchi, Verity, and Vats serve as your standard cannon fodder that go down without much effort. Then there's some of the more challenging enemies like Bianchi Boxer, Rosetta, Red Leader, Black Leader, and Cromartie, who have more aggressive AI and health. Bianco Billy is the ranged enemy that can attack from multiple angles. Tank and Gelby are your big enemies that do large damage and have armor, and Harrier, Joker, Black Thunder, and Metal Leo function as your mini-bosses. Standard enemies can be dispatched with your regular punch and kick combos, but the rest of the enemies will require more strategy and utilization of the VFX abilities to take them down. The enemy designs stem from real-world camera equipment, like how one eye is a red light and the other is the shutter from a video camera. The last major aspect of the gameplay would be the bosses. And the bosses are tough. The game has 7 main bosses and each of them is difficult enough to act as a final boss in any other game. Each boss has their gimmicks, from dropping stalactites on you, raising and lowering water, to one of them even using your own arsenal against you. To be blunt, you will die numerous times until you learn the boss's attack patterns and phases. Once you learn the attack patterns and how to counter the bosses, they become fairly reasonable to deal with. The only one that I admittedly had trouble figuring out was Fire Leo, who is widely considered to be the most difficult boss in the game. This is due to him being fully invincible, and unlike the other bosses, you can't damage him unless you cover yourself in flames from being in Mach Speed mode. All the bosses are unique in their design and personality. My personal favorite is Alistair due to him acting as a rival for Joe and being a reference to one of the main weapons from DMC1. One gripe against the bosses is that there is an endgame boss rush where you have to fight the first 4 bosses again with more health, which feels more like padding to extend the game's runtime and doesn't offer much explanation to justify it in game other than them just being statues. Overall, I believe the game's mechanics actually shine because of the difficulty as opposed to in spite of it, and that gameplay is Viewtiful Joe's strongest attribute. At this point, it should be known that Kamiya designs his games more around gameplay and visual design, foregoing a strong written narrative, and Viewtiful Joe is sadly no exception. The game centers around Joe saving Sylvia from Movieland after she was abducted while they're on a date at the movies. Initially, you have Captain Blue acting as a mentor to Joe, entrusting him with the V-Watch, teaching Joe how to use his powers. The plot twist at the end of the game is that Sylvia's kidnapper is none other than Captain Blue himself. What? The reason for this is that Captain Blue, or King Blue, whom I'll refer to as his evil persona, needs to sacrifice her to be able to conquer not just Movieland but the real world as well. There isn't any real explanation as to why a sacrifice would be needed to take over the human world. Keep in mind, King Blue just grabs her from the theater through the screen while you're in the real world. They also don't cover why that sacrifice would need to be his own daughter, making this aspect of the plot feel even more contrived. After Sylvia is kidnapped, you don't even see her again until like episode 6. I feel the team could have added some cutscenes from Sylvia and the Jado's POV to add urgency and make you feel more invested in saving Sylvia. Dive kicking even further, there's also the lack of a significant character arc for our titular hero. Joe remains the same cheeseburger-loving goofball from the beginning of the game to the end. It can be argued that his resolution to save Sylvia is strengthened after failing to save her when you defeat Fire Leo, but he faces no internal or external struggle other than needing to save his girlfriend. And speaking of our love interest, she functions purely as a damsel in distress and doesn't add much to the narrative beyond that. Now, this game being made in the middle of the 6th console generation, I'll give it some slack in this regard. Aside from JRPGs, female characters were normally boiled down to being damsels in distress or the occasional action hero protagonist, and the latter was especially rare. Now, what about the game's primary antagonist? Captain Blue is the closest to having any form of depth or character arc. At the beginning, he's idolized by Joe and serves as a guide early on in the game, having a bit of a master-student type relationship due to the boss fights where he teaches you how to utilize your main abilities. However, you find out that his warped obsession with world domination has caused him to lose his way from the hero he used to be. I dislike that they don't add more context to show or explain why he chose to embrace this drastic change. To add to what I said before about the cutscenes from the other characters' perspectives, just adding text to help fill in the gaps in between chapters would have aided in making the narrative more cohesive. While the gameplay is undoubtedly the game's strongest suit and most defining aspect, the narrative is its Achilles heel. Another notable aspect about Viewtiful Joe was its unlockables. Capcom's games are famous for rewarding the player for doing multiple playthroughs. Like how in Resident Evil, you can unlock new costumes and special weapons, or in DMC you can unlock characters in game modes. In Viewtiful Joe's case, there's plenty of content to unlock. You have 2 game modes that can be unlocked, being V-rated, aka hard mode. Funny because of the game's difficulty already. This is unlocked by beating the game on adult mode, and then there's ultra V-rated mode, being the Joe must die difficulty, being unlocked by beating the game on V-rated. One thing to note is that ultra V-rated, regardless of who you choose, there are no scroll indicators for the high and low attacks. Along with those game modes, you can unlock 4 playable characters. Sylvia is unlocked by beating the game on adult mode. She takes more damage than Joe, but moves faster and can jump higher, emphasizing more agile and evasive play. Alistair is unlocked by beating the game on V-rated. Unlike the rest of the cast, his Henshin mode works opposite compared to the other characters, functioning more like a double trigger. He can float and uses a sword and the forfeit of his combo string. And then there's Captain Blue. Captain Blue is unlocked by beating the game on Ultra V-rated, and he is considered to be the best character in the game. He does more damage than Joe and Alistair, and he can float for long periods in the air, but he cannot double jump. The big caveat to playing as Captain Blue is that you can't see any skulls regardless of the difficulty. Finally, there's Dante, the character that was added to the PS2 port. Now, Dante can be unlocked by beating the game on any difficulty. Like the rest of the cast, he has access to the game's core VFX abilities, but unlike the others, he utilizes weapons like Alistair and Ebony and Ivory to replace his punch combo and air kick, making him the most unique character and allowing for some strategies that are exclusive to him. Another thing to note is that these characters don't have their own unique campaigns. You're just replaying the same levels with some tweaked dialogue and a few of the character models being swapped out. Regardless, the extra difficulty and characters only add to the whole package while leaving the core gameplay intact. Now, if you like what you're seeing and hearing about Viewtiful Joe, a question some of you might be wondering is where you can play it. And the answer is through emulation or original hardware. Sadly, Viewtiful Joe has never been re-released on any platform after its initial launch aside from the previously mentioned PS2 port. No remaster, no collection, no HD port, staying locked to the GameCube and PS2. Despite its positive reception from fans and critics, the game wasn't a sales blockbuster compared to DMC or RE. This could be why Capcom didn't give it the Okami treatment of being released on modern platforms. On the other hand, because of its frugal budget, Viewtiful Joe did well enough to get a direct sequel, 2 spin-offs, and an animated series, with Joe also being a playable fighter in 2 of the Versus games. So why is there no Viewtiful Joe or Clover Studio collection from Capcom? Especially with them re-releasing their beat-em-ups, fighting games, Ace Attorney, and Mega Man titles on modern platforms. Now my theory is that 1, I might be pulling a Guile Wincolt here by making a video, and later in the year they could potentially launch a collection, via the Nintendo Direct. A bit optimistic, I know, but the real reason probably is that there probably wasn't a producer or director at Capcom to kind of champion the franchise and facilitate a revival or a re-release. We have to keep in mind that more niche titles from developers need somebody to step up and take responsibility, because these titles are risky and they don't have the sales viability of your Monster Hunters or your Resident Evils. Well, this was the case until a few months ago for our boy in red, because Big Papa Kamiya is back at Capcom and he's already working on a direct sequel for Okami. Kamiya has stated he would love the opportunity to create new entries for the franchises he created at Capcom, like Okami, DMC, and Viewtiful Joe. And now that he's returned and revived Clover Studios, the probability of our red-clad hero returning is highly likely now due to his return. All in all, this game is a must-play if you're a fan of the stylish character action genre. And even in the current landscape of modern games, it's still fresh and has much to offer. Not to mention that its mechanics were also translated into the Bayonetta series in the form of Witch Time. It's a challenge that can be daunting at times, but it's a fun test of skill and will push your tenacity even if you're a veteran of the genre. And even though its story is a generic hero saves legendary tale that was starting to get dated even back when it released, its gameplay and vibrant visual style are extraordinary, while still allowing the game to show its creativity and how expressive it is. If you can't get your hands on a GameCube or PS2, emulation for the time being is a great way to experience this game with an improved resolution. Hopefully with Kamiya back, we can get a collection or a full-on sequel so that more people can experience just how beautiful this franchise truly is. Thank you guys for watching. Let me know what you think of the Viewtiful Joe in the comments, your experience with challenging games, stylish action games, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.